Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. I've got you on live stream too, but I don't know, there's probably.
Yep.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, this is our February meeting of the MTRC. Maureen, you have a couple of announcements to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming back to the MTRC meeting. Seems like it's a February meeting, right? Attendance is a little low, but, and to thank everyone for their service. This is a very highly productive group, and I think it's important just to talk about this at reorg, that we will this year have both a chair and a vice chair for the first time, and I think that sharing the love also helps the cause. And in addition, I want to say both to the members here and as well as to the public that it's important to remember that this is sort of viewed as a bit of a think tank in some respects, and that not everything that gets discussed here is necessarily acted upon by council. Everything is considered, but there are some times that we're just not ready to act on it, but appreciate all of the hard work that this group does, and has come up with a number of ideas and concepts over the past 4 years that have tremendously benefited the city. So just wanted to start with that as we go into our reorg this year. We will be selecting, once again, Mr. Crowley as our chair, and Martin has agreed to act as our vice chair. We're not doing so by vote. They volunteered. So for both those listening and for our fellow committee members, that will be our construct going forward. So that was it.
And we have Russell on the phone. Russell, can you hear everybody?
Yeah, I can hear everybody.
Okay, good.
Sounds pretty good.
All right, we have, let's go to our agenda. And it's probably going to be a short meeting today because it's more in the form of a reorganization and a brief review of some data that we've been able to collect over the last couple of months. So let's start with, the roll call we can take care of, that's done. And the reorganization, let's talk about our meeting schedule. The plan is to meet every other month on the second Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock.
So I'm sorry. I will make sure that those meetings get posted. So our next meeting would be in April, and then it would be June, August, et cetera. I will send an email out to everyone giving the dates. And we had agreed that we would, in the 2 summer meetings, which would be June and August, to meet at 1 o'clock. And I will make sure that those meetings get posted on the city website.
Okay?
Okay?
Is that all right with everybody? Good. All right, let's look at first the 2024 status report by way of a sort of a year-end report of what we've done and what has been processed to this committee and through to the council. I think you got a copy of that in your mail? You got that? Yeah. Okay. Are there any comments, questions, concerns that you have about this list? Anybody?
I have no concerns. It's pretty comprehensive. Thanks for
Yeah,
recapping everything for us.
and we'll post this on the city website
Okay.
by way of a minutes for this meeting. Okay. That being said, let's move to the next one. And I set up this, which is sort of a schedule or a, that's Martin, for you there.
Okay, thank you.
This is, going back over our notes, our minutes, and our activity for the last 4 years. This is also, we'll also post this on the city website. This is what we could anticipate as being issues or topics that we would be covering in the coming year. And I would note for the benefit of the public, if anyone's listening, that this list will be on the city website, and it also begins by a verbatim quote from the resolution which created MTRAC in 2020. We're entering our, let's see, what it would be, actually, we're just completing our 5th year.
Right, right.
So we've been, we're getting old. So we're looking forward, I think, to some of the issues on this, and if we can walk through these things just very briefly to see if we all have a sense of what they are and what they're going to be. And let's take a look at the first one, the mechanics of the municipal budget. We had talked about that bonding schedule once before. We had talked about the surplus policy that we had recommended to the city. Any status on that?
Yep, yep.
Was this, I didn't see this in the packet that Dennis sent out.
It isn't in the
Not-
packet.
Did I-
It's not in the packet.
It's not in the packet. It'll be posted to the website, or I can scan and send it to you.
Yeah, it'd be great to send it to the committee for sure separately. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll do that as soon as the meeting's over. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had asked you if there's any update or...
No, there is no update.
All right, the second issue is something I put on there for a discussion, and I think it's important for the committee to be briefed by the council and by you periodically in terms of whether or not recommendations are being implemented or what the plans are for them, and whether or not going forward we can have sort of a tracking mechanism similar to the status report that we just gave out. And I guess we can work with you through that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been times where presentations have been done. Not all recommendations are acted upon. I think that there are some things that it is good for council to be aware of, opportunities, but it is not always, ready for prime time, as they say. So sometimes the status is present it, recommend it, but there may not be any action at that point in time.
Yeah, this is more, though, I think, I made this suggestion more, not so much for council as for the members of the committee.
Okay.
To see that we can share on a regular basis some sort of record of how the recommendations are being perceived and when we can look for some
So the recommendations, I think, should be, what I've suggested in the past that I think is the most effective is that if there's a recommendation, that it's sent to council in writing via the city clerk. And then that way, it is known to be sent to the city clerk, who will then pass it on to council. I can't say, Dennis, and I wouldn't want to ensure that there will always be a feedback loop, but I think the acknowledgement that it's received, sent and received, certainly could. There are some things that, just at that particular point in time may not be something that council desires to act upon. But certainly takes, anyone who sends information to council, we all review it. We may actually have conversations amongst ourselves, one-on-one, about it, but it's not necessarily formally back, because there might not be a consensus at that point in time that we want to act on something. So it's not as if there's, Yeah.
I guess my point is just that alone would be enough
Okay.
to suffice the committee members that, yes, we've got it, the council's got it, there has been discussion, there's been.
right. And I think that,
determination.
yes, and I think that the most effective way to ensure that that occurs is to send it in writing. Because there's not always the time or the need for it to be a public presentation, but
No, I understand.
Yeah.
The flow from this committee to
Yeah.
the council.
Yep.
Clearly would go through a clerk's office, that's
Yep.
not a problem.
Yep.
But the issue is, though, coming backwards in the other direction.
Well, my responsibility would be to say, as a council member, I received that document, and, I did discuss it with my other council members, but it may not be a report beyond that, at that point in time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm making this,
Could I add something? Sorry.
yeah, Russ, go ahead.
Yeah, because the only thing I would say, Maureen, to your point, and by the way, congratulations on your being you on your promotion, I guess, whatever, assistant manager.
That remains.
Our condolences.
Yeah, our condolences. But the only thing I think that's important, I think you've heard this from Vendetta, certainly has, and Martin from me before, is if council really isn't interested in something, or is saying, look, this is a year or 2 or 3 out, we need to know about that, because why waste our time on it?
Yeah.
And I think that's fair enough. And one of the things that there was a change to this year in the ordinance with regard to the committees, with regard to communication from the council liaison to the advisory committees, MTRAC included, so that there's discussion about topics that might be undertaken. And so I expect that we're going to get a little bit more of a loop, a closure, that we're going to be talking about in advance between, myself and the committee chair and vice chair. These are the subjects or the topics that we're going to be talking about. And saying, yeah, the council wants you to look at it, or inverse, the council says and the mayor says, we want MTRAC to undertake this. And so that everyone feels as if their time and their energy is valued, and that you're working on things that, you don't feel just fall, by the wayside. I mean, the value to this is the work that has been done has been remarkable. It has certainly been a tremendous benefit to the city in many ways. And we don't want to sort of disenfranchise anyone, but there are times, and the reality is that not everything is ready for prime time. And so it is my responsibility to come back and say, please know, the document was reviewed, discussed amongst council, not in a formal way, but maybe on a one-on-one individual, which is oftentimes how we do things, just because of, how we're permitted to talk.
I would never expect, Maureen, that the council's going to take up every great
Yeah.
idea we come up with, either because it's just not the time, or, you
Yeah.
don't have the time.
Nor do we need a lengthy explanation on why. It's nice to just kind of close off a topic and say,
I think
"Been considered and we're not moving."
the acknowledgement that it's been received, reviewed, and at this point in time, no action
Right.
will be
That's all.
undertaken.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, it would be helpful to just go back to that language of the resolution that created MTRAC, because our task is kind of a one-way task. It's what is it? I could just read it. Is committed to investigating alternative sources of revenue and to consider new and innovative ways to finance the provision of municipal services, to maintain a stable tax and rateable base, and to maintain the city's property tax at a minimum level necessary to provide those necessary services. So that's sort of our broad-based mission. We're revenue hunters in a way. And so everything that's on this sheet for our 2025 issues is really a revenue-based topic for discussion in some way, shape, or form. With that in mind, let's go to the revenue schedules and the revenue collection. And why don't you make your little report at this point?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So since our last meeting, I did look at 2 more brokerages in town for our list with mercantile licenses. I looked at Remax and Long and Foster, and then I was able to look at 51 properties from VRBO just along Beach Ave. And so my total I have at this point, I looked at 1,082 properties. Out of that, 902 did have mercantile licenses and 180 did not.
So what are those numbers
say it
again?
again.
Sure.
1,082
Properties.
Right.
902 with, 180 without.
900.
So was 16%.
Okay, I was going to say something.
But with VRBO, I looked at 51 properties and 29 did not have licenses.
51 properties?
So that was 43% didn't have licenses.
Okay.
And how many didn't? I'm sorry, Sarah.
Sure, it's okay, 29.
29, thank you.
Yeah, so much higher with VRBO.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's-
And the median percentage for the brokerages is 15% at each brokerage.
15%.
Did not,
And what was the percentage on the VRBO?
43%.
43%. Okay. So that sort of narrows in on the compliance issue.
So I just want to mention that at one of our previous meetings, several companies were provided to Mr. Dietrich, the city manager, with regard to taking a look at whether or not they had the functionality to investigate out in the market, different listings, whether or not they be through a local real estate agent or on Airbnb, Vrbo, or a number of other sites that are out there, vacations, rentals.com, et cetera. And although they did not provide the functionality that we were looking for, he was able to get a reference to another company. We had a demonstration on Monday, and this company does exactly what you've been doing, Sarah.
Oh, wow.
So their analytics of looking and scrubbing, 10,000 sites, able to pull up properties by address, almost like a Google map search. It's all based on an Access database with pivot tables so that you can select and deselect different criteria. It's tremendous. They're currently in 400 markets, Atlantic City being the closest market to us. And it very much is the issue of, taking out the zip code becomes a non-factor. So we were able to see just the Cape May Island. So anyway, we're looking at the proposal, but just wanted to let you know that we were able to finally find a firm that could provide the functionality that really gives us the QA and the features and functions that.
And that zip code issue is something that you stumbled over because
Yeah. So this takes that was my first question, and takes it right out.
So
That's amazing.
2025 action item, because we're getting to be that season, right?
Right.
Not much we can probably do with Vrbo, but can't the city contact the realtors and say, on average, 15% of your listings don't have a license, and we need you to make sure that your rental properties have licenses?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a question I had too, in terms of your list, and also this company that we may be contracting with. Are we able to, well, let me rephrase that. When there's a rental property listed with more than one agency, can we clean that data up so that we're not counting two properties when it's only one?
This firm, it does it.
It does do that? It does, okay.
Yeah. Because it'll have a property, it'll show you the Google Earth, it'll list all of the sites that it's listed on.
Yeah. And this is fantastic work. This is just, this is much more comprehensive than I could do with a hunt and peck, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
But let's do something with it. This is significant revenue for the city.
So on your list, when agency A is listed, an agency, this is just the primary listing, or you see what your list would say, this one here?
Yes.
That's-
this
We're only
counting
is-
it once. Sarah?
That can be rented through any number of agencies, but it's listed with only one.
Correct. This is where I found it. So I looked at 7 brokerages and then Vrbo, VRBO,
Yeah.
and I just listed it there where I found them.
Okay. And how about Airbnb? Did you,
Airbnb, I only looked at 6 properties.
oh,
It was much harder for me to determine where they were on the map,
Yeah.
but I could find it with Vrbo.
okay, all right, good.
Well, Sarah, I think everyone really appreciates it's illustrated that, we certainly have some opportunity here. Maybe by the April meeting, I'll be able to report back where the city is with moving forward with this potentially. So it gets you out of the manual process, but it certainly has illustrated that there is opportunity for us to make sure that everyone is playing fairly.
And the only question I had about that new system would be, can it identify when a property is listed without a broker?
If it's just listed with Vrbo or Airbnb or rent by owner,
Yeah.
I didn't look at that, we didn't see a sample of that, but I can certainly ask.
Okay, all right. That would be the only one other piece of data.
Have to be linked to something, Dennis, because
Oh, I
if
think so,
not,
too, because
if
it-
not, then they're just renting it to their friends and family, and it's all by word of mouth, and no
Right.
one's ever
There
going to
aren't
be
a lot-
able.
I'm sure there are not a lot of rent by
yeah,
owner
yeah,
properties, but.
right. I mean, there's a website, rent by owner, but it's still a website.
Okay. That's good. Now, let's go back to our list of issues. Code enforcement, it's a constant concern of this committee that code enforcement be comprehensive and properly funded. And I think that's an issue that we're going to we're going to try and keep on the front burner for this committee for the coming year, as well as those other revenue stream issues. And one thing that this committee hasn't really gotten into in our 5 years of life is the whole notion of grantsmanship and state aid, which I think, since it's a source of revenue, I think we should at least take a flyby and see if we can put some structure around what the city's doing with respect to grants and state aid, just to make sure that we've covered that base. All right? The utilities, we're constantly looking at that, in particular the beach utility and that new system that they're supposed to be implementing. You had mentioned that before about renting out the beach space to the hotels.
Well, the shared services agreements are up for renewal in 2026, and I have put it on the radar for Mr. Gillenschwartz and Mr. Dietrich, and provided them with all of the comments from this committee. So they have those notes at this point in time. And when, they're ready to start, engaging with that, which would probably be after the 2025 season.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. And the other thing, we had made a recommendation, which the city is complying with and actually implementing, and that is to scrub the utility budgets to make sure that appropriations which are properly attributed to the utilities are not improperly attributed to the general property tax base. And that's an ongoing budgetary act, but we'd like some briefings on that just in terms of progress. And again, the 4 big capital projects we have ahead of us, I think as a more or less a public service, it would be a good idea for the committee to just review in some organized fashion how these 4 things are being funded. And so that's something we want to look at, unless somebody in the committee doesn't want to. This is an issue, the next one is developmental impact fees, which is something that the city is authorized and allowed to do by state statute, and that's to recover some of the new costs associated with developmental properties, which impact utilities and public services. And to the extent that this may be closing the barn door after the cows have already left, but there still remain several properties and projects in the city which are going to be converted and upscaled from small townhouses or small bungalows to larger properties, and especially when you get into the area of residential facilities that are actually used as rental properties, and sleeping 11 to 20 people is an impact on our utilities, because when you go from one small bungalow with a bathroom and a toilet to a sleeps 20 with 7 bathrooms, you got a developmental impact issue. Trash and recycling, I know the city has looked at this and has that came up, but in terms of how the recycling program is funded and what revenues are generated from that program, it looks as though it's going to be an ongoing problem because it's so out of sync with the way we do the rest of our trash in the city. So I'd like to keep this on the front burner if possible, just to make sure that we are not spending more money than we have to, which is really money coming from the property tax base as opposed to the service base of revenue. And again, we're going to stay on our federal representative to try and get them to understand the impact on our local revenue by the fact that we have the Coast Guard base in town. And our proposal, now a couple of years old, which was to create a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes, which would in some way compensate the city for the extraordinary, and I use that word accurately, it's an extraordinary impact on this city that almost no other city in the entire country has. It's an impact that it causes a huge balloon in our property taxes. And the fact that it's there and it's generated solely and completely by the presence of a federal facility is something that we just, as a committee, I would never want to have this committee say, well, okay, we're going to have to live with it. It's something we need to make sure that, and the committee started out by looking at what we called low-hanging fruit, then we looked at medium-hanging fruit. This is the high-hanging fruit, but it's a critical piece of our revenue profile that we just can't, if it's a high-hanging fruit, we need to get a ladder and go up and try and do something with it. And so I would recommend that we keep that on our watch list for the coming year as well. And the regionalization of services, do we know much about this? We have had the police services. Martin, you were working on that, and I should make a comment to the public. We had 2 of our members working on this issue diligently. We've lost one of them. We sent him up to council. We're like the farm system. Well, you were already doing it. You were already off the committee.
Well, this is for next year. Shared services agreements are not up till 2026. I've put this out there for Mr. Gillenschwartz and Mr. Dietrich. The work that we did when Marty, myself, and Steve were doing sort of that work group, we covered both police and had discussions about EMS. So there's some basic sort of framework that we went through. We met with the chief of both the fire and for the police. So there's a good basis for this right now. And so until we get to the point where we need to start working on those actual contracts, the period, there's no reason to bring a group back. Marty did a great job in putting together some of the financial analytics. We had some baseline numbers. We sort of modeled it, how we did the court administration one. So I think there's a good framework. It's back there. But it may come down, in your briefcase, it may come down to, at the time, the negotiations and what the interest is from the other municipalities. And, at this point, it's too early to say.
Well, I think we should keep it on our radar because
Sure.
those contracts expire in 2025. And so this time a year from now, we will have had to have a new contract in place.
Sure.
Which is going to be,
I think there's some preliminary discussions starting to be frank.
okay,
Dennis, okay.
in terms of finalizing.
Not finalizing in discussions, just sort of start the ball rolling, questions being asked by the other municipalities. So those are preliminary. I don't know anything else at this point in time. I just know that there's been some outreach.
So what I would offer is that I recognize that one of the barriers to implementation may be simply that the city employees don't know how to get started. In terms of, remember we talked about having different tiers of usage, driving different fees.
Sure.
MTRAC's not in a position to be able to run these things, but I can certainly consult with the city employees that once we get to that stage,
Yeah.
to be able to sort of give them some guidance on what we found and how do we envision using it.
Yeah, so I think once the preliminary discussions are underway
Yep.
and we establish that, sort of the desire
Right.
to continue to move forward with our relationships, then I think
Right.
that we can start looking at some of that level of.
I would think by mid-year, we've got to be putting some energy into it.
Yes, and was the reason my prompting back out to Mr. Gillenschwartz and Mr. Dietrich, just to say, keep it on your radar, but, if.
Actually, Marty just mentioned a point there, which I want to amplify a little bit. We really would have to, as a city, we would have to have this thing set in stone by Labor Day of this year, because that's when the budget for the next year starts to be developed. So we can't go into a budget development cycle
Right.
with something that's not hard and fast.
As I said, there's preliminary discussions underway.
We'll definitely keep it on the
Yeah.
front burner.
Yeah.
Okay. And, well, that covers,
I'm sorry, while we're on that topic, 9/11 services has been controversial in other towns in the county that, for example, I think Wildwood just went to county 9/11 services.
Right.
Is that something that,
Oh, county dispatch, I'm sorry, when you
no, not county, is that the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
that seems to be working out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always initial bumps in the road.
Yep.
There's the orientation of the staff in a centralized location of that, to calls coming in and orientation to locations, et cetera. But it's been very effective. I mean, after the initial, I think, there's not been any issues since that point in time. And it's much more effective and honestly, cost-effective. And it hasn't created any issues, as far as I'm aware, and haven't heard anything from
No.
chief so.
Okay, the next issue is something we had talked about as a committee a couple of months back, and basically, we didn't get much cooperation from the county officials, so I think we should try again, because this whole dynamic of tax rates and tax dollars going out of the city to county services is something that we really need to dig a little deeper into, because it's our mission to deal with revenue and taxes, and it's all part of the same mix. So I think we as a committee should redouble our efforts to get the county down here and to explain to us, this is the countywide problem, because apparently the county directors are experiencing a little bit of a shove back from towns in terms of transparency and what their budget is, and how it's developed and what's in it, and why is it so radically different from a lot of the budgets in previous years. So I think I think it could develop into a flagship issue for this committee for the next 12 months at least. Because as that chart we had passed around, you have that in you have this one from
Yes, on here, I do.
and you have, Russ, you have this chart. I sent this to you last week.
The title of it, Russ, is The Escalation of Tax Rates 2016 through 2024.
Yep, I've got that.
Okay,
Okay.
just wanted to reference what it was.
So the county now represents 37% of our property tax, where not even 10 years ago, that's 5 years ago, 8 years ago, it was 24%. So and again, we had discussed this, and just to remind everybody, the reason that's escalating so rapidly is because they're using a real-time real estate appraisal as the basis for their tax rates. We're not. We're using the assessed valuation, which leads us to the next issue, which is revaluation. It's on the list here because it's going to have a tax impact. It's probably going to be a very difficult and complicated process. And we're doing a mapping program now, right?
Digital mapping.
We're doing
Yeah,
it.
we're doing a digital mapping that was,
And I think probably we're going to run into a bit of a roadblock based on the fact that there are only a few companies that do this, and everybody's got to have this done. sooner or
yeah.
later.
So, one, it's basically driven my understanding is that oftentimes the schedule and the criteria is driven by the county tax assessor. That's the person that sort of indicates which city and municipality is scheduled to go when. That there, as far as I know, from what I recall, and this may not be exact, there's really only one firm that operates in New Jersey. That may be wrong, but it's very limited, if at best.
This is one that does the south and one that does the north.
Really? Okay. And this, could be upwards of several $100,000s or more, which needs to be funded by the municipality, is my understanding. So the digital map was first step that we needed to do. And so that is underway now. But we have not heard any more from the county with regard to where we sit into
The digital
the.
map was a precursor.
Yeah.
And it gives us the ability to be more confident in our knowledge of our tax base.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily lead right into revaluation. It will eventually, but not immediately. So it's a good thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
We should have done it years ago. Okay, then the last item is the issue of parking. And this, if you're talking about high-hanging fruit, this is a high-hanging fruit. And there you go. You can have that there. Parking remains a problem. Everybody complains about it. the viability of the commercial aspect of Cape May is making parking a more and more problematic issue for the city. The temporary opening of the piece of property that's going to be our park as a parking lot for big events across the social calendar has really focused in pretty clearly on the fact that we could use more public parking, way more public parking, just to accommodate the people who are coming in at all hours of the day, for the beach in the morning and the afternoon, for the bars in the afternoon, for the restaurants in the evening, for so many other things that this town depends on for its economic viability. And what I tried to do with this piece of paper, and Russ, I'll send you this one too, I just did it yesterday just to get it myself into focus. I think we've talked a lot about the little pieces of this issue, and I think that somewhere along the lines, we need to have a document which chronicles the steps necessary to really fix the parking problem. And I listed these 9 things, which we've all discussed as a committee over the last 5 years, but have not resolved any of the issues. We made a big presentation to council 3 years ago on this very issue. But let's just walk through these issues and see if I'm going to get some feedback and some comments, if possible, from everybody in the committee. The first of these issues is that we've recommended that that the city amend the parking trust fund ordinance, because it's in its present state, it's essentially useless as anything more than the repository for the parking assessment that we put on mercantile licenses, which all in and of itself is not just a meaningless, but it's an inappropriate assessment, because people who have mercantile licenses by nature don't necessarily have to have a parking assessment. They may not have a need for parking. They may be providing their off-street parking all by themselves, and then, so why should we be penalizing them for a parking problem which they don't have and they're not contributing to? So that $25 parking assessment, we've recommended as a committee that you repeal that because it's inappropriate and inconsistent. We really should look at, the city should look at establishing a parking impact assessment for everybody based on our zoning ordinances and the requirements in the zoning ordinances for off-street parking. If somebody provides off-street parking or on-site parking, as it's called, they shouldn't be paying anything. Turning that parking trust fund into a repository for a larger amount of dollars will allow us to fund a lot more things that could solve the parking problem than we currently can afford to do, because we don't have the revenue to do it. The local sales tax, and we're one of probably no more than 4 or 5 communities in the entire state of New Jersey that is authorized by the statutes to charge a local sales tax. And that local sales tax is limited to the relationship between the tourism industry and the source of that revenue. We're working on a parking and traffic study that's now going on 30 years old. Nobody knows for sure how many parking spaces we need, how many we have. And we had talked in the committee like 6 or 7 months ago. Joe made the good point that there are programs, computer programs, even services that would be able to clearly identify what the parking requirements are for the city. And that could be done through a lot of different ways. We need to be exploring some of those ways as we are exploring the collection of data on rentals. And ultimately, number 8, we really need to go forward, and, well, actually, we can't go forward and shouldn't go forward until we have a current and comprehensive number of parking spaces that we know that our ordinance is required. There's been talk among townsfolk that the zoning ordinances are so out of date, they're so inconsistent with the realities of 2025 commercialism in Cape May, that we should remove the parking requirements, which really basically says that's like the checkered flag at the Indianapolis 500. It's open season to park anywhere you can, which is not going to solve the parking problem if we don't have a way to compensate and provide parking and fund it appropriately. And number 9, there's plenty of precedent in the statutes of New Jersey that give us the authority to create a parking authority or a special improvement district, and even suggest public and private partnerships to increase that availability and have those things funded both by the Parking Trust Fund, and if you create an authority by its statutory nature has the ability to bond itself in a way separate and apart from the city. So all of these things need to be thrown on the table, and I know it's not, like I said, it's not a low-hanging fruit, it's a high-hanging fruit. It's going to be one of those issues that is probably going to be suggested that we maybe think about it a little bit later or think about it down the road, but the point is, it's never going to get any better than it is right now. It's not even going to be as good as it is right now, because we all hope and we all expect that Cape May will be the vibrant commercial success that it is now, which, if you've been to the Christmas parade, you know what that means. So, that being said, this is sort of a checklist that I'd like to throw onto the agenda of the committee. Not so much we want the council to do this right away or to do it at all. We'd like to have it put together in a tight package so that we can begin the process of publicly discussing this, the way to solve the parking problem that we cannot solve and have not been able to solve since it first appeared in the master plan in 1995. So that being said, I'd like to recommend that we, as a committee, take a lot of our time this coming year and flesh out these 9 points.
So I just want to mention that I had a brief conversation with Paul yesterday, and if you could send this document to me separate, Dennis. He has formulated a land advisory group, which has representation from Planning, Zoning, HPC, Environmental, and Shade Tree Commission. And I've asked him to sort of take a look at some of the things that are on this list already, and his response was that he thinks the following discussions at the LAD work group could be a priority: evaluation of existing off-street parking ordinance requirements and how they relate to the state residential site improvement standards, and industry standards for shared use parking requirements, and then number 2, the development of off-street parking solutions. So that's a start for us to get there. So send this to me, and then I will share that with him, and we're going to put that into that group for them to work on, associated with components of this.
That's great news. And let me tell you this, these are bullet points, 9 bullet points.
Sure.
There's I have tons of information about each and every one of these things.
Okay. Well, I will share this with him, and I will say to him, if there's something in particular that you want Dennis to forward to you so that it can be used by this work group, he can reach out to you.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Dennis, I always felt your proposed dual-track planning made a lot of sense, where you've got the solution being worked on and the funding being worked on. They're really 2 separate
It really
issues.
is. And if you don't do it that way,
Right.
you'll never be able to address the problem.
So one of the things that Paul and I discussed along those lines is that, some of the things need to be sort of, the ordinance pieces of this and what's on the books need to be aligned. And then he and I discussed that, we need to start looking at some of these assessments, how the parking trust is developed. So I think again, this was a brief conversation yesterday. One of the concepts might be that as the city manager, he takes that in-house, works on it, similar to how he did the development fee model, and then come to this committee with some recommendations on how it could look and work, understanding, the comprehensive nature of it. So just, he and I have to sit down and sort of flesh that kind of description out. But he said, as a priority, the things that I just discussed
Yeah.
are two things that LAD could do, and then the second piece could be that they sort of do the petri dish, as they say, put together the formulation, and then this committee could look at it and sort of vet and say, okay, yeah, because it'll might require us to be looking at how other municipalities provide for services, what their assessments are, based on what. So, I think it's a work in progress, but it might be a good way for us to start it in-house and then bring it to this group for review.
I like that idea, that's good, don't you think? And because it's really, it's too bad that 3 or 4 years ago, the city had sort of tried to do this by creating the Parking Advisory Committee and the MTRC, and MTRC was supposed to work on the specs of the parking committee recommendations.
Right.
And then they never got off the ground. In fact, the committee is no longer in existence.
Right.
So we never had a chance to actually get to work on some solutions. But Martin reinforces the point this committee makes, and that is that in terms of a planning model, it's so much more effective if you have your funding mechanism and your funds in place before you design your alternatives.
And I think that Paul's approach and the approach that he's taken in his time has shown that he's going to look at data across municipalities. He's going to look at baseline. The development fees is a good example of, it came to us, we looked at it, we vetted it, it was objective data. And so I think that that's a good undertaking. And that way it's, in some ways you don't want to necessarily push this up. Having it owned internally, that the city, city administration has looked at it and feels like they understand the data points and how those data points were derived, gives us a little bit of feet.
And then at that point, that's the best way to approach this, I think.
Well, I think City Manager Dietrich has also mentioned that the Quality of Life Committee is interested in this issue too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of does come full circle, and it's a big enough problem that it should come full circle. But I also think that as we go through our day-to-day lives, something that large can just keep on getting pushed forward and pushed forward.
And honestly, to your point, Marty, it has in many ways. It becomes when June rolls around and then we're all saying, oh
Right.
wow, look at that.
Right.
But I think if we're taking this on from review of ordinances and how they, if they're contemporary to, or they looking at the reality of our community now.
Yep.
The other piece of it is, how is the parking trust set up and how, could it be effectively leveraged? What are the changes that need to be made? And then finally, the quality of life comes into sort of the quality issues, the issues of people living here and dealing with, parking issues in their own neighborhood where they live, and whether, what needs to be done. Look, some of this is, may never be a problem that can be 100% solved.
Right.
But if you can at least work and chip away at some of the things that are no-brainers, as they say, low-hanging fruit in a very complex kind of situation, it might at least ease it. And then you look at whether or not it has to be a multidimensional. What does transportation provide for us? What does that transportation look like? And how we could best leverage that kind of a program and where the funding comes for that, and be able to change behavior and et cetera. So
That's it. When you provide transportation, intra-city transportation, you've got to change the behavior of the people who come to the city. Otherwise, you're wasting your money.
Yeah,
And the other thing too is, this is a good step forward, because we need to get as deep into this as possible with you and Paul and all these committees, these internal committees, because we have to have this completely scoped out in order to make it visible as soon as possible, because the public needs to have a huge role in this process. The people who live in this town are the ones who are complaining the most about parking, and well, they should be. because it's a phenomenon that's unlike probably any other city, unless you want to look at.
Well, and I think that's why bringing people who are on the current boards as part of this LAD group is important, because then it will receive updates. And if we're looking at ordinances or, resolutions that need to be changed or modified, that's going to happen where people are going to see, okay, look, something is being done. This is an issue of baby steps, folks. We all know that. This is not, you're going to wave a magic wand and it's all going to, be fixed. I understand, I know. What I'm trying to say to the public is, we will have to take a number of steps, and not all, and it will take us time. This is not a solution that's going to be found in 6 months. But maybe at the end of a year, we can look back and say, okay, we addressed the 3 or 4 things that are helping us get momentum to move this forward. One of the things that we are looking at right now is, grant money associated with transportation for trolleys, for electric trolleys, and how we could, take ownership for that. But that may not be for 2 years, because that's how long it'll take us to get through the grant process, the approval process, and then have them built. So the solution may not be in the summer of 2026, but we have to start.
We have to start, and I would remind you that the steps of a baby squirrel are shorter than the steps of a baby elephant.
Well, I know that I need to reassess, I need to reassess my own priorities, because Councilmember Bodnar and I have quite a number of discussions about parking over beverages, and we have a high level of interest in trying to work towards a solution, but I know it's not going to be easy. But
Everybody does, and
Yep.
we need to, this was meant to be the opening of a comprehensive approach to actually trying to solve this problem. I don't know if we're going to solve it, but we're going to try and solve it. But we can't solve it by opening up the vacant playground lot for parking, because that park belongs to the people who live here, and the people who people are going to pay for, the taxpayers. That's not a parking lot, that's their park. So we can't get into a box where we don't solve the problem, but we address the problem by mutilating the park space. That's just not the way to do it.
one thing I would challenge that you said, Dennis, is that the residents complain about it the most. We don't know that. I would think the people that complain about it the most are the people that visit the city, but even more so the people that don't visit the city because they can't find parking and they're just tired of coming here. So it hurts the economy of the city. It's not just a matter of quality of life, it's dollars and cents too.
I have to tell you, about 15 years ago, I got into a bit of a problem with an unnamed city official who we were talking about. Remember the lighthouses that used to be on the bridge?
Yeah.
They were talking about whether they were hideous or this or that, the other thing. And I said, well, we should combine that problem with the lighthouses with the parking problem, and we could change the light in the lighthouse and have it red when there's no parking spaces anywhere in town, so that you can't come in. And he didn't think that was funny. I didn't mean to be funny, but
We actually did that in one of the hospitals I worked at. They put traffic lights on each floor, and it was an open atrium hospital. So you were able to, so if you came in and you were, a physician
Yeah.
or whatever, you could look up and know that, the yellow light was on the 8th floor. And so it was a visual, so that people would know who were working there, no one,
yeah, right.
visitors didn't know, that there was, a capacity issue, reaching a capacity issue on a particular floor, or if it was the 8th floor, then they would know that, no, if it's red, you're not putting a patient up there. So, go down, assess, make sure you're discharging your patients timely. And so we've got a bed open for that, and that was.
So you like the idea of a parking garage?
I don't, no, don't put those words in my mouth. Yeah, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. Anyway, okay, that's my spiel for today. Who's,
So that's Maureen.
what's that?
It's just the paper.
Oh,
I want
more
to pass
stuff?
her.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, that's for Maureen.
All right.
thank you.
This is mine?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, what else do we have on this agenda? We've covered our issues. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to see the committee attack for the coming year? No? Anybody?
My only question, if I could, my only question is, I know we're about increasing revenue. I suspect we'll start to, the number of ideas, as you said, Dennis, the low-hanging fruit will start to, be high-hanging fruit. I guess it's not in the committee's charge, but it just seems like there may be, there's two ways to keep property taxes down, right? One is to raise revenue, and the other is to reduce costs. And I'm not suggesting for a minute, Maureen, I don't want to take away that I don't think the city's doing that, but I just wonder whether or not that should at least be thought about as we consider things going forward, particularly as the revenue ideas start to dry up.
So I think one of the components to that, Russ, and, philosophically, it doesn't sound, I don't want to sound negative, and no, that's not something we should do. What I've learned on being on council is that this is very much a multidimensional kind of budget based on projections and, anticipated revenue targets. If you think about 60% of our revenue is really being generated by our tourism industry, by the people coming over the bridge, buying beach tags, all of those things, and having self-sustaining utilities, it becomes even challenging for us as we look at the budget. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. When I'm looking at it, my eye is always towards, well, where can we be more circumspect about costs and expenses? This city has done a really good job in keeping costs low to the point where we don't necessarily have, and this is a personal opinion, not a council position, that, at times when we look at our ability to recruit and retain employees, we've not been as competitive in the market, in this market. And so that's an area where, rather than retracting down and looking at cost savings, we need to invest more in order to be competitive and to be able to get people to want to come and work here and be able to keep them here, because they certainly can't live here.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily saying that we reducing people.
No, I'm just giving that as an example. Yeah. But there's but I have to tell you, in a budget like this, probably close to 80% of the city's budget is people.
Yeah, and Russ, I would answer this just a little differently, but I agree with everything Maureen just said. I would answer it this way. As she mentioned, our property tax percentage of our total revenue is 45%, which is about half of just about every other beach town. So we're not in a position right now that we're overtaxing our property taxpayers. We're actually doing them a big favor by generating so much revenue from our other streams that we can have a 45% percentage. This committee has always almost taken the opposite view, and that is we have a lot of revenue. We've generated revenue. We need to be spending more of it to get the jobs done that we are not able to do now, or that we can't do completely. We need to. This committee, I don't think, maybe I'll stand corrected because everybody's not here, but this committee has never been. The position has never been cut the property tax. The position has been spend the money for what you need it on to make sure our services are adequate and effective. We've been saying this for years, that we don't have a problem cutting, we wouldn't want to cut the budget. We want to increase the budget if it makes our services better.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's difficult when you're doing things over the phone, face to face. I wasn't, as you know, Dennis, I've been a proponent in the past of increasing staff for people, as an example.
I know you have. Yep.
Are looking at making sure folks are complying with the laws that we have on the books. So again, I wasn't necessarily suggesting that we.
No, I didn't think you were.
Yeah, and I didn't think so either, Russ. I was just trying to set the example that the majority of the budget really comes down to the cost of people, pensions, health and welfare, all of those things. So when you look at sort of the operating expenses, it comes down to what do you need for water and sewer to run? Well, it's the people and it's the equipment. And there's just, I'd like to say that there was an opportunity for, if we were in a position. But as Dennis said, if 60% roughly comes from tourism, we need adequate police presence during those seasonal times. We need fire people. We need the lifeguards. We need to have a pretty nice and robust tourism program here. You need to be able to have public works. So when I look at the budget and I'm looking at it, the soft cost, as some people might call them, is really not, there's not much meat there. And so if I looked at something and said to you, you know what, this is maybe a program we could, sink our teeth into, I would do it, because I come from an environment in healthcare, and you know this. Every year I would get a budget target, and then they come back and say, no, you need to cut 10% more. It was never about getting more. It was always about starting with a number and then getting less. So I'm used to that mentality.
But think about shared services.
Yeah.
Shared services is an area where you don't necessarily, you might cut people, but it's more about, are there opportunities to cut costs as a result of shared services, or get the appropriate revenue you should be getting from others? So I'm sorry if I didn't mean to open up a hornet's nest at all.
Oh, no, I don't think you did. I don't think you did.
I don't think,
Yeah.
there have been others that have,
Yeah.
there have been others that have brought that topic up at public comment at
Mm-hmm.
the city council, okay? I think that we still have a mentality in this city where we do scrub our operating budgets pretty well, okay? But you can get complacent too, and we should always be on the guard of making sure that we don't get fat and happy. But at this point in time, it's really not about trying to raise revenue to reduce taxes. It's to raise revenue to increase smart spending on the things that improve life in the city for the residents and
yeah.
visitors.
So Russ, to your point, and so I don't forget this thought, to your point about shared services, I credit Marty and Steve. Our work group last year, we did a good job at taking a look at making sure that we were being objective in the data. And that when it was presented for those court administrator contracts, we had a solid reasoning behind that. And I think that
Using that simply as an
Yeah.
example, not to say that it wasn't a terrific job.
No, but to your point is going through the next step. It set the foundation and the model, so we know what to do. I mean, because, there could be criticisms that some of those contracts were put in place 20 years ago and just evergreened year after year with no real analysis of it, and it demonstrated that we needed to be a little bit more exacting and taking a look at fully loaded cost. So to your point, I think we've gotten a little bit smarter about some of those things, is just,
And I guess the closing.
I don't want to delay the meeting any further. I think everybody understands my point.
Yeah, and I did want to make just two comments. One is that, and this is coming by the fact that I spend a lot of time looking at other people's budgets just to get a sense of where we stand. Cape May is probably the most fiscally responsible municipality at least in Cape May County, at the very least in Cape May County. And secondly, the city government has done the heavy lifting when it was convinced that it was a good thing to do. An example that I always use is the occupancy tax. We have other people from other towns calling us and asking us to figure out, can you help us figure out a way to get the occupancy tax? Because we see what happened in Cape May. Lower Township has an occupancy tax because we had one. Right. And sadly, a city like Ocean City is now behind the eight ball because they just voted to not have an occupancy tax.
Yeah, I read that.
And they're walking away from millions of dollars of revenue that they could use to make that city services better. But that's their problem. We got our own problems here in Cape May. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll have our next meeting in April.
Our next meeting in April, let me just, for the, sort of the,
Well, let's not wait till April to get back to the committee on that company that you're looking
as
at.
soon as we make forward progress on it,
Okay.
I will. But the next meeting would be April 10th.
Okay.
all right?
That's the second,
Second Thursday,
okay.
all right?
Okay. Let's have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Second, adjourn. Thank you, everybody.